Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Clinials Insights. In this series, we'll bring together voices from across the clinical research ecosystem, founders, innovators, and practitioners to talk openly about what's changing, what's working, and where we need to do better. Today, I'm joined by someone who represents the true engine room of clinical trials. Lorraine Dishman has decades of experience working across sites and CROs in the thick of operation and human realities of trials. We'll be exploring the frontline perspectives, what it means to balance compliance with communication, how limited resources shape the work, and where technology and AI, including Clinials, can help ease the load. Lorraine, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Maree. I'm glad to be here. So I know we talk a lot, but just to introduce myself again, I'm Lorraine Dishman, Senior Project Manager in Clinical Operations. I did start on the site side working directly with patients in various therapeutic areas at the beginning of my career. Over time, I moved into, CRO project management, where I've been in the middle of everything from contracts to compliance. But what I like to share with people is that what drew me into this field in the first place was growing up with my mom's epilepsy, which as a family was really hard to manage. And we knew there was a better way to manage it. We went through a lot of doctors, a lot of treatment attempts. And just over time, I knew that there was going to be a better way. So that led me into research because I just wanted to be part of that change so other people didn't have to go what my family had to go through. So it's a little tidbit. I don't know if we've talked about that yet. But yeah, I didn't know what brought you into clinical research, actually.
Yeah. Well, a number of things. I mean, for example, my auntie was a genetic bioethicist when I was growing up, and so I had lots of conversations about ethics and research, and she invented connecting a microscope to a TV in the 1960s, so she could review chromosomes and she'd be telling about some of the, I didn't realize that they might have been called clinical trials, but, some of the experiments that she was doing where they were understanding about chromosomes. So that was my growing up. But it feels like the planet aligned because what happened was several years ago, my husband went on a clinical trial and I saw, firsthand the complexities of protocol information and the process that a patient had to navigate and understand what was in those complex documents. And so it piqued my curiosity. Then once I dug deeper and had conversations with people in the industry, such as at sites and CROs, I discovered that the complexity was also felt by the teams, and that I saw communication happening in silos, and the spark, I guess, was frustration. I kept hearing from site teams that the trials were slowing down because of the silos, or they weren't slowing down because of the science. It was the paperwork. Brilliant clinicians were spending hours copying and pasting and formatting documents instead of focusing on patients. And then patients were not understanding what they were seeing and hearing. So that was a long light bulb moment. If AI could take on the repetitive grind, transforming how we communicate, then people could get back to the work that really matters.
Yes, I agree. And, having that background, and I believe that, we both come with a very personal experience to bring us to that understanding and further working on that side. I experienced with my mom's care, but later when I worked on this site side, I recognized the same pattern. Communication, sometimes wasn't clear. And that doesn't give the patients the opportunity to be confident in the trial that they're participating in. The informed consent, everything is going along. But if we can't communicate things clearly and efficiently, then how can we expect a patient to want to continue or to continue on in other research studies? And so when communication is clear, patients and staff do better, and that relationship is a lot stronger, because at the end of the day, that truly is what matters to me and is important to me and why I'm here, because we want to make people healthier. It's important. And this is an avenue that we do explore that in. So I'm 100% in agreement with you on,
Yeah. exactly.
Clear language. And even the ICF and, the IRB do have that concept, or the intent, excuse me, to have that language clear. There still can be a barrier to that understanding. And so you have to take it a step further to bring it to like a plain, clear language, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, but having those personal experiences is what, when everything's tough, if you go back to that, that's how I navigate things. I mean, and you've spent much of your career on these front lines, but what, those, I think we've talked about the personal experiences in your background, but what personal experiential moments have shaped how you see this industry today?
There's been a lot of changes in the industry today. Most recently, really, this movement to patient-centric protocol designs and this focus on bringing it back to the patient. I will describe my early years in clinical research as the patient was seen more as like the end user, not a part of the solution, but a data point in and of itself. And that makes it a little challenging, especially if you're working with patients that are within the physician's office that you're working with. They're used to talking to their doctor on a very personal level. You come in as a research coordinator and it's ABCD, you're going through your list, and it's very routine, because you don't always have that time to build that relationship with that patient, right? You're trying to adhere to everything that you need to do to get that visit done and get the data entered and go back next day, start all over again. So yeah. I believe this is where AI and Clinials can come in and really help. If we can get rid of the burden, just the administrative burden of those tasks, that's more time back to that patient, because it's important to have that rapport.
Yeah. And I hear that as well. I hear about some of the team members that they're staying up till midnight or whatever, trying to get that documentation done, the consent forms, and then the next day they're so exhausted and they have to work with patients again. And they have to put on not put on, this is part of how they are. I've got a family of nurses and that's just how they are as well. And so okay. Just that exhaustion, but included in the exhaustion is the mundane of having to just do so much admin, that drives me insane. And then from the patient perspective, and I've been on the other side of that with my husband, just receiving an email which has a complex informed consent, without even having had a conversation about it, like, make your decision based on this. And so, I see that's what drives me. I see this complexity, but the overwhelming admin that doesn't have to be so, that we can make it a lot easier. So, team members get to spend more time with their patients.
So when you guys were interested in the trial, if I may just ask you a personal question about your experience through the doctor's office, did they email you the consent ahead of time of making the appointment to come in and talk about it?
Yeah.
I know people do. I've known that's a process that people follow. I find that, not very customer service focused, right? Because some of these consent forms are really long, depending on the therapeutic area. I've worked in several. And even as a coordinator, it's intimidating. Yeah, I prefer, and I've always worked with docs that had the preference of bringing the patient into the office to have that conversation. And part of that, and I am 100% will say this forever, if your PI can make or break your study at a particular site, and I've always been lucky to have a PI that's like, we will not email consent forms. It's a way, but look at your experience. It was like, this is a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then part of the email that I remember was, if you decide to go ahead, then when you come in, you will sign the form in person. So it was like, make your decision based on this ICF, and then when you come in, we'll talk you through it, or you'll make you sign it then. So that was, So,
Yeah. No, I mean, and I know you had a family of nurses and you had that expertise to lean on, but a lot of patients that come through do not.
no.
And especially, I live down in Texas. We translate a lot of our consents into Spanish. And English could be a second language. You prefer things in Spanish, but things could be lost in translation. You're trying to have a discussion with your family and you come back and there's no person there to answer questions as you go through. Is just absurd to me. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And again, I'm just blessed to have the experience to bring our patients in and talk to them.
Yeah, that's right. And while you're the language concept, I mean, that's also why when we launched the content generation hub, my mind was, this is not all about English. This is also about bringing the languages of the people. So if we're providing them an ICF, then we need to be able to create it in other languages. So we can edit it in English and then translate a Spanish version, for example, and we can still have it certified, but it's any of the content can be translated, because it's not just the patients, it's also the team members that are speaking other languages as well. So, this is inherent in content generation, is it's all about communication and making it simpler to be able to understand what clinical trials are about. And the admin burden. So now I've got a question for you. In your experience, where do compliance and legal requirements most clash with day-to-day site or CRO work?
I'd have to go back to say that informed consent, right? Because that's compliance. We have to follow it a certain way, and the intent is correct, right? Protecting our patients and our sponsors, but the wording can be so technical, and staff spending that extra manual time on breaking it down to answer the appropriate questions. I mean, that truly is a pain point on my end. And then having lived that from both sides, I know how important it is to make that language accessible. We do have nurses in on my side of the family too. And when we went as a family to my mom's doctor's appointments, and we'd leave scratching our heads, and these are, women and men that had been in the medical field as well, because it was just a new area for us. Yeah. But when we can make it clear and we can answer those questions clearly, it doesn't take away from the content of the informed consent, which is our regulatory and compliance piece. It just allows us to have more of a conversation. There's nothing worse than starting out as a coordinator and reading the ICF verbatim to a patient. I'd want to have a discussion and be able to have, it be conversational when I'm explaining parts of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's a fine balance as well, because you have to make sure the way you're explaining it aligns with what the consent form is, but never just leave them alone fully.
No, that's
at least in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. But you can have accompanying things, like you can have a plain language synopsis, or you can have a patient brochure, and then that can be or in our case, we also generate landing pages and pre-screening, which are really simple and visual as well. So it's about having the layers of communication. It's not it's not one thing. So we know that's how people work, and we know that people talk to their friends, to their clinicians about what they're doing. And so it's having some things that they can then explain also what they're doing and validating. So, that's the pieces of communication. Is not just the one thing. It's not the compliance, it's also the real world communication, and they don't have to be opposites. They can work together.
Right. And in my experience, patients don't always, like in your experience, don't always come alone. So sometimes you might have a spouse and or somebody else come, and then everyone's asking a different aspect of that question with the patient. So it's being able to have communication with two or three different people, and that conversation is going to vary, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That would be my answer, is that ICF.
Yeah, exactly.
Very important, but a little challenging.
Yeah. Well, I think, and also the regulations give us the guardrails. So they give us the rules of the road and the guardrails, but the communication is what makes those rules make sense to humans. I mean, that background of me having the ethics, my auntie being an ethical genetic biotech scientist, but it was all about how it makes sense to humans and what it means to humans. And so that's the gaps. So yeah, the guardrails of how we explain it, and so it's ethical, but then clearly, providing clear communication. So definitely, as you say, the bridge is plain language, multilingual plain language, and documents that are both compliant and also clear. So we can certainly do that with AI. And then the humans bring the empathy and the nuance.
And I do like the ability with Clinials that y'all break down the visits very clearly. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's embedded. In an ICF, when you look at it, it's just continuous paragraphs. They're very long. And if you just want a snapshot of, well, this is what I'm committing to, right? Especially a phase 3 trial that could be long term. This is how many visits I need over this period of time. Is this going to work with my work schedule, my family commitments? And it allows you just to present that very quickly, which can get lost in the overall consent. So I do like that aspect of y'all's reporting.
Yeah, that's right. We updated the plain language synopsis to include that per patient visit information, so it's in that way. But yeah.
And what's expected per visit, which is also helpful from the site side when you're looking about developing your budget, when you're looking at your resourcing. So it really does serve a dual purpose.
So can you share a time when clear communications, or the lack of it, really made a difference in how a trial run?
Yes, it's a good question. There was a time I was working on a study, protocol amendment about mid-study. It's common, it happens.
80% apparently, is it?
Yeah, it can be a high percentage. They're always challenging to navigate because they can slow things down. In this particular instance, the amendment wasn't clearly explained. It really was very similar to what your ICF was, sort of delivered by email. Again, very common in the industry. And we were supposed to make sense of it. Well, we couldn't. We had a lot of questions. There's different ways of interpreting what this means. So we're spending all this time going back and forth with the sponsor because we still needed to see patients according to a predefined schedule. Yet we're changing it midway. So now there's an aspect of reconsenting. If we don't know what we're changing confidently, how can we convey that to our patient? Long story short is the sponsor finally came back and did like a 1-page summary, scheduled a call to go through it because apparently enough sites were asking the same questions.
Wow.
They had to back up and then come back and approach it. Just, the concept of the SIV where you're just going through everything at the very beginning, but it was just night and day. Then we all had our questions answered. We went away as a team. It made sense. And we approached our patients and it was very clear what we needed to say and articulate. And we were confident. We're like, we got this now.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a big blunder when we don't get that communication.
Yeah. It's almost like they should do, what's changed, between previous protocol and the new one, and then.
I've seen it that way. This is just one instance of a situation where it was messy. So, not all sponsors do that. It was just this one.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But we do hear that a lot. And some people are, would like to know, well, what was in the protocol before and what's now in it, and have the sponsor provide that, or, be able to have AI understand that, or will quickly regenerate the informed consent as well, with the new way. So I guess that's where AI can do that.
Yeah, we could get a summary of changes, but even on the CRO side, a lot of, the team would work better on a red line of the protocol if there's an amendment. And it was always asking for it and then waiting for permission to share the red line. You know? And people worked a little bit better that way. So it's interesting. It varies out there, but yeah, agreed. A summary of the changes, we could go. But it took us asking a lot of questions and pushing back to finally get that. This is several years ago, by the way. So Yeah, maybe there's some other AI out there that are assisting with that. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Amendments are pretty frequent. They can be frequent.
Yeah, yeah. So about AI, so there's a lot of hype. I think we've talked about this before about AI, and that it will replace people in trials. I mean, let's clarify that. I mean, it's really about the humans that are involved, at the sites, and the humans that are in the trials. We're not about AI is definitely not going to replace. It's about taking away the busy work. In our example, we're taking away the busy work, the mundane, drafting. Drafting is the key. So there's a human in the loop. So drafting operational documents and ICFs, reconciling the changes, providing the team some cheat sheets. That's also something that's come up. Being able to analyze or provide a summary so the team can train on, what the protocol's about instead of 150, 200-page document. So all those things that eat up the hours, that's where AI fits in. It's not about replacing, it's about the busy work, the mundane.
No, I agree. And you could see it from so many sides. Even internally, we use an app or a program like Clinials. If I'm going to have an internal huddle with my coordinators, I'm going to be able to print out that synopsis and say, hey, this is a study that's coming. Quickly throw it up on the screen. We could talk about it and then go back and do our resourcing and planning for that. Whereas before, a lot of that time was manual, putting together a PowerPoint, putting together this presentation to talk about it. Whereas now we could generate it. I believe y'all's turnaround is 3 to 5 minutes on a report generation. Correct me if I'm wrong. Right. And then I can just take that sheet in because it's not patient facing, it's internal. PI is interested. Here's what we got. Team feedback. Where do you think we are? Boom. And we can go on to the next phase, so that saves time. I also played a lot with the landing page, and I love how y'all's landing page is. I worked, for a research company, and we contracted with several different doctors in different therapeutic areas. And we were linking it to their website for trials that they were on. And it was cumbersome, especially if you're not a web designer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What y'all's landing page does is such an amazing amount of customization that, that can be particular for that doctor. Their logo, their color scheme, how they want to present it is awesome. And that saves a lot of work. And I really played with that hard, like, oh, this is so cool.
Yeah, I know.
Yep.
Well, this comes back to my experience, the experience of, receiving an IHCF in the email. Wouldn't it have been nice that they, sent instead like a landing page that just had, the really nice summaries, the benefits, why I would be interested. And then after that, if I was interested, then send me maybe a brochure or an ICF, after that. I think it's too much. It's too much. We need to, that's the thought process that went through, which is why the two things we created first in Clinials were the plain language synopsis and the landing pages and pre-screening. And by the way, when we generate the pre-screening questions, it's not all of the inclusions or exclusions. It's only the questions that you can actually ask a patient.
Yep.
And we know that many of those complex questions or inclusions or exclusions cannot be asked of a patient. They wouldn't know. They wouldn't know what some medical word was. And so that's the consideration. So, we can think about, we have to put ourselves in the mindset of the patient is what can we ask them? And then what can be done by the site team, in the next conversation, once they get a hang of it. Oh yeah, this is going to be good for us. I can do this. I can commit to this clinical trial. That's it.
And that's where your PI comes in, because your PI is really going to know the patient population very well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the point of why we've also included the human in the loop in our solution, is that, AI can generate this content fast, as you say, but people, like you were just doing, is you want to be able to, edit and curate. You want a different picture. You maybe want to also tell the patient something or other, and that all can be done. It's really important to have the perspective of humans must be included.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think AI is going to come in and take over any job in clinical research. It's going to make it easier to do our jobs and get back to the basics, which is working with the patients and having that relationship with your patients. There are times, like I said, I started as a coordinator where your day is so rushed. You have so many things going on. You're pulled in so many different directions over the course of many studies that your visit with that patient's very rushed.
Yeah.
And afterwards, you're like, okay, because I have to get to point B. And you're left kind of feeling like, I didn't give that person that time that they needed. Just a simple conversation of how was your weekend?
Yeah.
You're coming in doing vitals, boom, 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 boom. Okay, see you next visit.
Yeah.
Busy. And you have to go XYZ.
Yeah. Yeah. And what if the patient could have in their hand the information, either in, on their hand or their phone or whatever, this is what this visit is about, and they like
what to expect.
And, goes back to that having to be explained to their family or, and have it as a good explanation because, many times, when they go back to their families, it may not be easy for them to explain. And so, they feel like they can't explain or, then someone will say, oh, you're on a guinea pig clinical trial, you're a guinea pig. And so they can go, no, actually, this is what we're doing and this is why it's good. And, it's something they can put their hands on.
No, and I experienced that, firsthand growing up, and my mom would come back from a doctor's office and, whether her mom attended with her, my uncle, she'd come back home and try to explain it to my dad if he was working and he couldn't go. And it was really hard. She's living it. She has epilepsy. She knows her experience, but being able to articulate that back to my dad so that he started attending so he could understand because we do that in translation. And it's not just about a particular patient. It's also about that patient support system, which is their family and their friends, just like you're saying. Everybody goes home and talks to somebody about what's going on, right? We all have people that love us and care about us and want to know. And they want to make sure that we're making good decisions as well. So that's important.
Yeah. Now, if you could change just one thing about how the industry treats its people, whether it's site staff or CRO teams or patients, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really good question. It goes back to resourcing and making sure that our resources are efficient, our resources are not redundant. We have a clear path of what's expected. And, we're allowed to have an opinion and we're included on the conversations. Sometimes, especially working on the site side, I felt like we worked for the sponsor, we worked for the CRO instead of it being we partner with, right? Because it is a partnership. We each entity needs each other to get to your end goal. And in my experience, it wasn't always the case. So that resourcing, that ability to have the voice and just making room at the table for everyone. That's a part of that file. The patient representatives, the doctor as well. The PI is very important. I mean, that is your expert in that trial. Your PM on the CRO side might not be a rheumatologist.
Just be.
Right? So it's important. I would say all of that.
Yeah.
What about you? What do you see on your side?
Well, I see that same thing. It's interesting you brought that up about the people, obviously the resources, but having them as more like partners. This is there is a lot of voice that is asking for this. They're caught between the sponsors pushing for speed or, pushing more and more with little accompaniment. And then the regulators pushing for perfection and wanting new ways and keeping on top of what the regulators are asking for is also a challenge. But, how can we design trials around the reality and value the well-being of, the people in the sites, the teams, and how to keep the talent that are in the different places, that understand that the pain of what patients are, but also the pain that they're overwhelmed. They're up at midnight still doing this work, this mundane work. Do they need to be? Could they be home with their own families? So I think there's a lot of too much acceptance that this is the way it has to be. And why does it? Why can't we help team members be more efficient? Why
we've always done it.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't have, that's what I mean. And I guess that's the one thing that I see that innovation can help in. It doesn't change the human, but it changed the way they can feel about their job, about that they don't really want to be there or still working late at night. They'd like to be with their families. And how many hours could we give back to them that AI can do? So, that's what I feel, is that the valuing the people in the trenches matters the most.
And listening to what they need, not necessarily forcing a process on them, but what do you need? How can I help you? I'm able to build the tool. How does it work for you? Because coordinated burnout is truly a thing. And there's also the PI, the one and done. You get someone interested in doing research and then they do one study and they're done for a multitude of reasons. But guys will, sign up for a trial and maybe not understand fully what the administrative burden on them will be to participate, because it's not just a passive role to be a PI.
No.
Things you're responsible for. So it's not just the coordinator, it's the PI, it's your nursing supervisor, depending on, where you're running your study. But so it's bringing everybody to the table, including that patient family. Just patients are people. They're just not that patient identification number. And that gets lost, right? Because it's, Maree, she's patient 1001. And then you just become that number and Maree gets lost.
Yeah.
Maree can get lost. So we want to find you again, right? And we want to engage you.
That's it. And so, and more than anything, I feel like those small sites, they are in it because they care. That's how they start off, right? They start off because, maybe the PI is involved in a specialty, really interested in the research. And then they become just burdened with admin. They can benefit the most, with innovation, because they need to be able to do more with less, so they don't become statistics of the one and done, And so that is something that is, I think, lost in translation as well. It's like, we've still got to do it the old way. We're just learning this, but the reality is they need to be so efficient so they can grow, not be a statistic of one and done, or ultimately, there's some people that say we're going to end up with lots and lots of site networks, and you might get bored out, but you get bored out because your efficiencies and your success, so those are all the, I guess, coming back to the partnerships and breaking down the silos and valuing the teams, and then they can have the energy to value the patient. So it's like building blocks.
One change I've noticed over the last couple of years is PIs being able to communicate directly with sponsors a little bit more. When I started, that was a no-no. I mean, you just never heard of that, just because it's like, ooh, like nobody reaches out to the sponsor. But if the doctor has a specific question, you have to go through, the middle person to get that answer, and it takes time. Things, again, goes back to getting lost in translation. So I've noticed that trend, and I think that's exciting, because we're all on the same email. We all understand what's going on. Let's see this problem. So I think that trend can continue.
Yeah. Well, even with some of the content reports that we're building based on feedback, we've got reports like risk assessments. So these sometimes sometimes what happens is, you know, the PI might need some validation as to why the pushback, or why they're not getting the patients, or, you know, why they believe there should be a change in the protocol. Because too often it goes out to the sites, and it's not until they start recruiting and, you know, you've got all these stringent inclusions, exclusions that really make it difficult to find the patient. So I think there's, you know, sometimes having some evidence or some quick content reports that can be part of the opening up the conversation. Do you really think that we're going to be able to find patients that can stop their medication, or, you know, that are going to be within these boundaries of data sets? Yeah, and also that's about the speed. So the sooner that, say, a site can communicate that, or someone can communicate that to the sponsor, then there can be a protocol update, you know, and make it realistic to be able to find patients. You know, I think that's it. So, yeah, well, thank you for this conversation. It's been awesome. Your perspective from the front line is an important reminder of the human side of trials and the balance between regulation, resources, and caring. To everyone watching, thank you for joining us. This has been the 3rd episode of Clinials Insights. You can find past episodes and more conversations like this on our Clinials YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.